Hey everybody, welcome to Colin Podcasting about real estate and welcome to show 24. So my guest today is Dave Holman from Maine. He's a really interesting character. He's a professional real estate syndicator. He owns, 100 plus portfolio mixture of residential and commercial single family homes. But his story goes a lot deeper than that. He lived for 4 years in Bolivia and founded a chain of camping stores. He talks about his first foray into real estate joint ventures with no money down. He learned about syndications from the ground up. He's got a fantastic portfolio, a very large passive income stream. He actively helps others invest in real estate as well. We talk about how he finds the best deals, how he structures them, how he finds the best people to manage them. He's also got a really nice philosophy on how to use real estate to help others that are less fortunate and do less damage to the planet. He's got some great advice for people that want to use real estate to 10x their possibilities and leave the world a better place. So really interesting guy, not the typical real estate story, but he's had a lot of success. He's done it in a pretty short period of time as well, all in the last really 6-7 years. So he's really been a man on a mission, I would say, and I think you're going to enjoy the conversation I had with him. It was pretty wide-ranging. So, before I get into that, the usual reminder, check out my website if you haven't done it yet, colininvestments.com, COLIN investments.com. If you do enjoy this podcast as well, by all means, leave me a rating or a review. And if you're active on social media, by all means, look me up there. You'll find me under either Colin Investment or Colin G. Murphy on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, all the usual places. I'm probably not as good at social media as you are. So if you like the content of these podcasts and you think it could be shared to a wider audience on your social media, I would absolutely appreciate that a lot. So by all means, do that if you can. And yeah, anybody wants to reach out for a chat, you can reach out to me via that website as well. I do set aside slots in my calendar for 20, 30, 40, 50 minute conversations with people that want to talk about their real estate journey or ask me for some advice on how to get started, whether it's as a wholesaler, a realtor, buy and hold investor, whatever it might be. If I can help, I am certainly very happy to. But that is enough about me. Let's head on over and see what Dave Holman has to say. Dave Holman, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, Dave. It's my pleasure. So you've had a very unusual real estate and entrepreneurial journey, Dave. It's different than anyone else that I've spoken to. And I believe it took you from Maine to Bolivia, Guatemala, and all the way back to Maine again. It sounds fascinating. And I'd love if you could share that story with us.
Absolutely. So I grew up in rural Maine, kind of middle-class family, no real estate involvement. Went to public school, and I went to college out in the Midwest in Minnesota, in Carleton College, and ended up studying a mix of like environmental technologies and building. I thought I might become an architect, based on those. And also I studied Latin American studies, so history and culture of Latin America. I went down first to Guatemala and then to Bolivia studying. And while I was there, I met a really nice young woman. We started dating, and I knew I had to see where that was going. So I went back after graduating and spent the better part of 4 years down there. And we had to make up some excuse to be together down there. So we started a chain of stores, or I didn't know it was going to be a chain at the time, but started a camping store. And we also sold books, maps, guidebooks, books in different languages, and just had a blast doing that. Went out and started a second outlet and then a third, hired employees, really got a business
So where
going.
were you? Were you in La Paz? Were you in the Bolivian countryside? Where was this all happening?
We started in Cochabamba, which is in the middle of the country in a valley. Then we went to Copacabana up in Lake Titicaca, kind of a very bustling tourist town,
Sure.
But very remote, hard to get goods to, a lot of cultural issues going on there. And, if you're an outsider, you're a real outsider. I was the only American living in the town for the better part of a year. And it was interesting, but I had learned some of the local language, Aymara, and most of the other foreigners were either Peruvians, and Bolivians and Peruvians are, oil and water a lot of times. Right. Any neighboring countries always have a rivalry, right? So, and then there were a bunch of like Argentines, doing drugs and stuff. And so I was actually, as an American, there weren't enough of us to really make a splash. So I got along pretty well with the locals, and it went pretty well. And that store took off. It really did well. So we started another one in the capital of La Paz as well.
And remind me again, what were these stores doing? What were you selling?
Yeah, they're called the Spitting Llama Bookstore and Outfitter, and we sold, backpacks, camping gear, tents, hiking boots, and then we also sold books and guidebooks, maps. We even published and created some maps for people that had never existed before. So it was a lot of fun to be down
And this
there.
was when you were in your early 20s, and what year is this? This early 2000s,
Exactly.
mid 2000s?
Yeah, 22 to 26. I was down there, really immersed in Spanish and doing business and just trying to buy low and sell high and kind of learning the basics, and I'd always realized, man, it would be really cool not to have to rent our stores, because rent is just, you're burning money every month and you're trading, money for the service or the good of housing or lodging. It'd be great to own them. And that way, most of our monthly payment is just us putting money in our piggy bank, and it's cheaper over the long run. But there were political challenges to doing that. And, in a town, if they don't like you, they're just going to expropriate your house. The private property rights are not as strong in a country like Bolivia.
No kidding. What was it like setting up a business? I mean, did you actually have to set up the Bolivian equivalent of a limited company or an LLC? I mean, how did that work? Was there a lot of red tape? Was it just Wild West? Everybody does whatever they want and says nothing? I mean, how did it work?
Both. It's both. And every developing country, it's pretty much the same. It's both. So 90% of all the business in most developing countries, and Bolivia is no exception, is black market, unregulated, laissez-faire. It is the true and ultimate capitalist system. So no matter how socialist the country, your little street vendor, even in Beijing, China, is probably just taking cash and not paying taxes and just doing their thing. And then the more you formalize, the more you get into red tape and all the Latin American bureaucracies that they inherited from Spain, they can get pretty top heavy, pretty Byzantine, pretty bureaucratic pretty quickly. So, and we started with a minimum of all the formality, and we, went up that totem pole, and it gets tough. So you have to be able to deal with a lot of stamping and paperwork and permits and stuff like that.
Was there anybody trying to shake you down to just get money off you for the local bigwig to keep them happy?
Only twice. And one of them was Interpol, the international police. They shook me down. But the shakedown it's a really funny story. I mean, it's not real estate, but you got to hear this.
Yeah, go on.
For my 1-year visa, and I was living with a bunch of Europeans at the time. So I went to Interpol, and it's a 4-week process where they do an international criminal background check on you, and it comes back after a whole month, and you got to pay like this exorbitant $10 fee. And, they get it faxed back from America saying this guy's not a criminal. So I went back to my European friends, said, yeah, I just fired with Interpol. It's going to be a month. And they were like, Dave, you just pay the fee, and it's one day. They give it to you the same day when you're still there. And I was like, what? How's that possible? They're like, yeah, just ask them to go expedite it. I was like, really? So I went back. I was like, I think I made a mistake. I think there's like a fee I can pay to expedite my application. And they all got this guilty grin on their faces. I mean, it was just the biggest joke for them. They're like, oh, my friend, you want the expedited application. We need some paper. We're short on paper. Can you go and buy us some reams of paper? Sure enough, I go and buy them computer paper, for $20, and I get my certificate that I'm not a terrorist, the same day. So that was crazy. And then the local police in one of the towns, she basically said, how much are you going to bribe me? And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to bribe you. I'm just paying for my license. And she was like, well, you got to give me something. I was like, no, I'm paying for my license. She's like, all right, well, the license has an extra fee of 100 Bolivianas, which is the equivalent of like $12. And at a certain point, you're like, maybe there is this real fee, or even if there's not, it's not worth fighting over. Here you go, on we go. No. But ironically, Colin, there was not a lot of corruption. Most of the police, most of the people there are pretty honest. And I found that all over the world, where the higher you get, the bigger the deals in the government, then you're getting into the real murky territory. But for little people, it wasn't too bad.
I found that as well. I remember about 12 or 13 years ago, I was driving through Panama, from Panama City to Boquete, which is about a 4-hour drive. And a lot of it is just through the jungle. So it's a bit dark and scary. And if you're on your own, and there's military checkpoints from time to time. And I stopped at one about 15 miles outside of Boquete. And it was just, like you said, traditional shakedown. They're just like, step out of the car. I'm like, why? Just step out of the car, come into the office where there's dudes with machine guns, and you're sitting down at nighttime. And you're like, okay, what's going on here? And it's just a shakedown. I think I ended up giving them 40 or 50 bucks. And when I got to my friend in Boquete, another foreigner who'd been living there a while and was in real estate, he just laughed and said, you should have given them 10. They'd have been happy with 10. They're high-fiving each other with the 50 bucks you gave them. But it was, like you say, it was pretty easygoing, no threats or no kind of silliness like that. And I totally agree with you that the higher up you go, it would get nasty then. But with low-level stuff, 25-year-old kids with businesses, yeah, it's not, nothing to be afraid of, really.
Right. Yeah, the climate for business was actually quite good in Bolivia. I was doing a lot of this before the current government, which has made it a little harder. But or I say current. There was a socialist that won power, for a long period of time, from 2006. He got essentially kicked out of the country for fraud last year. Then his party just re-won the election. So it has a long history of political turbulence, and we're hoping that stability can overcome that. And there were pros and cons, to the socialist government. We needed stability, and they brought it, but there's also more bureaucracy, than ever before.
So what happened afterwards? You left Bolivia after 3-4 years. Did you just leave that business behind when you came back to start again, or how did it end up?
My father-in-law took it over. So my wife's
cool.
father is Bolivian. Her whole family lives down there. So they've been running it ever since, and it's still up and running. You can come visit us in Cochabamba.
Brilliant.
It's been a great experience because we oriented it towards tourists, thinking it would be a tourist business. And now it's 95% local people, who want to explore their own country, do hiking, camping, backpacking, read in different languages. So it's been very gratifying.
That's awesome. That's brilliant. So where did real estate come into your journey then, Dave? When did you first get involved in real estate?
Yeah, kind of accidentally in 2011. I had just finished my MBA program, and my best friend from college had become a real estate developer, helping these other more experienced developers. So they were doing an 80-unit apartment building syndication project in downtown Minneapolis, and they sent me a private offering. And I had only done stock investing up to that point, where 6, 7, 8% return is pretty good over time. And so they were offering an IRR, an internal rate of return of like 20% a year. And I was like, no way, that sounds like a scam, but I trust this person with my life. I mean, I know this is not a scam. So maybe they're just overly optimistic. And even if they only do half as well as they think they will, 10%, that's a great return. So, I just had inherited a bunch of savings, and I gave them a big chunk of it. Here's $20,000, go and see what happens. And I'm glad I did, because I probably would have spent it if I had kept the money.
And was this a kind of a 5 to 7 year syndication deal where they bought it and wanted to refi or resell it after a certain period of time?
Exactly. So they built it, did a refi in about 18 months, gave us about 40% of our investment back. Then it was quarterly dividends for the next 7 years. And we sold in 2018, and it was like a 340% return.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who bought in 2011 and sold in 2018 is probably going to be a happy camper.
Yes.
So, I don't credit myself for, with any intelligence there, but they're a great outfit. They did a very good job, very responsible, operators. And I think Minneapolis was and probably will continue to be just a dynamite market for residential.
I've heard that. There's some great opportunities there. So that was a really nice way of getting started, kind of relatively passive way of being, participating in the syndication. When did you start getting more actively involved, like whether that was buying your own properties or taking a more active role in syndicates?
Yeah, my family, I kind of convinced them to invest in real estate in 2013. So we bought a single family house together. And, I was a little bit involved, but not, by any means the only person. And then it was really when my wife got pregnant with our first child, in 2015, that I was like, okay, time to, turn up the gas, because I, used my MBA to work in nonprofits. So I was helping, Guatemalan kids who were living in the garbage dump in Guatemala City to go to school, with a nonprofit, Safe Passage. And I was making $32,000 a year. And when that can pay the basic bills, but you're not going to save a lot of money for your kids' college education on that. And I eventually moved up the food chain a little bit to work at Bowdoin College, where I was making, $60,000 a year. But still, that in America, that's you're not getting rich on that. You can live very comfortably, kind of middle class, but your kids might need some serious scholarships to go through college, or have some serious loans. And I didn't really want that. So I, in 2015, just started researching everything I could about real estate investing. I kind of came to it as, an idea of like, I think this would be a really profitable way to get started. And it's one where I can do it without my own money. If I'm a, trusted ethical operator, other people will invest with me and in me to do these things. And that started out just with family, who know me best. And then it went to very close friends. And now it's, friends, family, and people that I'm meeting, along the way, friends of friends.
So the first few deals were you finding single family homes for friends and family and collecting some sort of fee from the seller and then moved up the ladder?
Yeah, I did 2 single family homes just with direct family members. And we just basically had a deal where they put in the capital, I put in the work, and we split the deal. And they were, good enough deals that, you can split it. And
oh, sorry, were they flips or buy and holds?
Buy and holds, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm sort of exclusively a buy and hold investor. And, but I believe in transactional income. And I think if flipping is something that someone can do successfully, it's a great way to achieve it. I'm now a commercial broker, so that's my transactional income source, until I really am fully passive and so forth. But I love working and helping people too much to just, sit on the poolside all day. I'd get very antsy. So I stayed active.
I love that deal where you split the deal, where you're doing all the work, you're finding it, you're managing it, you're pulling the strings, you're keeping an eye on the cash flow, and then you're just kind of sharing the net cash flow at the end. But what about, how is the equity split up if they're the ones that are, like, are you on half the loan or how does it work?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I've been a guarantor of every loan that I've done, a co-guarantor, because again, when the bank looks, originally when the bank looks at my balance sheet, it wasn't very good. I mean, now I'm a accredited investor with a pretty good net worth, so banks started to take me a little more seriously. But back then, I needed, this family member's, income and assets to really justify the loan. And they were happy to make this investment because they had built up a lot of equity in the stock market. They wanted to diversify out of paper assets into something real that's not correlated to the stock market.
And can you give us some ballpark info on, like, what was the first deal or two? What was the purchase price, loan amount, kind of down payment, just so our listeners, because I think there's a lot of listeners that would love to get started like that might not have that 20, 30,000 down payment, but would like the idea of doing the work and getting involved.
Absolutely. And before I did the work, I spent a year researching and working with a, buyer's agent and broker, really demonstrating that I was going to put in the effort to make this a success. So I bought, the first one was $220,000 and the second one was $130,000. So these are kind of your bread and butter Cape style house, 1,200 square feet, very classic for New England. But, and this is critical, they were in a top school district. I mean, this was one of the top 3 to 5 school districts in the state. Always one of the best. So, that you can get a rental that cash flows well in a top school district, you will always be able to find tenants for that property. Because a family with kids who wants to live in that district will go there no matter what. Those houses rented for, in the 1,800 to 2,000 range. So you're a little below 1%. But not so far below it that
you're never going to get 1% in a top school district unless you're like on a unique time at the bottom of the market in 2011 or something. But generally speaking, you can't have both. Right.
And so, but now those houses that we bought for, 220 and 230, Zillow thinks they're worth 350.
Nice.
So in a way, you never want to bank on appreciation. That's not a good investment plan, but that has been much more icing on the cake than the cash flow would ever have given us. And we're actually in the process of refinancing those now. We'll pull out, all of our original investments. So it's kind of like a slower burr strategy that your investors are.
I like that. So your relatives then put down maybe the 20% deposit, which might have been, say, $40,000 plus closing fees. And you were co-guarantor on that loan, which maybe was $180,000 or something.
Exactly. Yep. Those are very close to the numbers. And we'll get all our money back and then some, this cash out refis. So and that is good because you're only getting, a couple hundred a month from these rentals at most.
Yep.
It's not going to make you rich or anything to get a $100 a month profit, or, the other one might have had 300.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And you're going to run out of uncles and aunts if you keep buying $200,000 single family homes. So whereabouts are you now? How many properties do
Yeah.
you own or control now?
Yeah, we just bought a $3.3 million building in the downtown of a college town right near us. And unit count is a little tricky because I've really diversified a lot into commercial. So I have about 97 units, but about half of those, or maybe 2/3 of those, are residential. So that's your
Okay.
typical, $1,000 a month, 1,300, 800 a month, kind
Uh-huh.
of D-class rentals. But then we've gotten into commercial buildings where, like, I have one unit that earns 12,000 a month. Um,
Right.
so not all units are created equal. And I kind of got into commercial accidentally by buying what I thought was a single family on the MLS, and it turned out to have 2 apartments up top and a commercial office down below. And it was, not marketed as a commercial property. So there was no income and expenses provided, no cap rate, none of these things that investors would look for.
Hmm.
And thus it had been, left over. And it was a little too expensive for a single family, even though it was in a great location, in a great town. And I went through it. I was like, why hasn't anyone bought this? And the rents are really low. They could get higher. And, like, this seems like a great deal. And the sellers were like, oh, thank God someone finally wants it. Because their broker had not marketed it, as an investment property. And a lot of times, if you get an agent who's just not,
I said they sign a listing agreement with a residential agent instead of a commercial agent, and they don't have a clue what to do.
right. So that's how I've actually found a lot of my deals are properties that are not positioned right, either by the agent, the seller, or just the strategy has not been the kind of highest and best use of that property. And when you can go in, you can find things that have languished on the MLS that are just not positioned right. And the only people that have looked at them are the wrong people to turn that into what it should be.
So what types of commercial properties do you have? Is it a mixture, or is it all kind of multi-family apartments, or do you have retail office? What kind of stuff have you got?
I have basically every asset class except industrial now. So we have 2 restaurants, 3 retail spaces, and then a lot of office.
Hmm.
And it's all pretty much small office. There's some kind of larger ones, but one of the strategies that I think is really important right now is to reduce the unit size of your unit. The
Okay.
big companies are not renting, 10,000 square feet of office space in the same way that they were pre-COVID. And frankly,
Sure.
it's not even going to be pre-COVID. It's just going to be pre-Zoom, pre-work from home, we don't need to spend all this money on office space because it's not that critical to our productivity. We can rent maybe 3,000 square feet of office space where people gather, a few times a week to exchange ideas and interact and be in person. But I
Hmm.
think the whole concept of office and work, is just changing much faster than it was going to change without this kind of shock to the system.
Yeah, I'll bet. And so those office deals, were they ones where you just kind of raised money in a syndication and you're the managing partner and you've got some equity in there with a commercial loan? I mean, how are they structured?
Yeah, ironically enough, all 3 of my syndications have involved office.
Okay.
And 2 of them are mixed use. So they have some residential, some office. One of them even has the restaurant and retail as well. That was the most recent one we bought. Um,
Uh-huh.
one of them is purely an office building. And that's an interesting story your listeners might enjoy because
Sure.
it was dangerous. And I knew it at the time. So it was on the MLS for 3 years. And it was
Wow.
marketed as an owner-occupant opportunity. So it's like, all right, 18,000 square feet of office space. You can move your corporate headquarters here or your business here, and this will be
Hmm.
your office space for your 100 employees or however many you have. It got under contract once or twice, but it had this pesky law firm that was in the top floor as an anchor tenant, and they wouldn't leave fast enough to let the other buyers' contracts work out, and it got kind of tense between the sellers and the current tenant. And so it
Okay.
was always marketed with the idea that this firm would move out. I came through as a consultant basically to help the seller's agent, kind of target this because she knew that I did commercial property and wanted some help with it. And I looked at it, and after going through it for an hour, I was like, wait, would the law firm stay and pay rent? And they were like, yeah, maybe you could talk to them. I was like, yeah, I'm going to buy this. Like, I'm definitely going to talk to them. Sure enough, I talked to them. We signed a 7-year lease.
Oh,
During the
great.
lease, for 46% of this building helped me completely break even. All expenses, mortgage, insurance, repairs, everything, utilities, their one lease breaks even. So I now have 56% of the building, 9,000 square feet, that I can rent, and it's pure profit on top of that. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is a great opportunity because it's pretty safe as long as this one anchor tenant law firm really stays. And as we, and our thought was to bring in one other big tenant, like a medical, practice or a hospital practice to use the whole first floor. We tried that. We bought it in March of 2020. We tried that for 3 months. It was crickets. I mean, we got one marijuana company like kicked the tires and not a good fit. And it was
March 2020. Yeah. Wow.
And I think that's going to be the way it is. Like if you're trying to rent a big vacant office space somewhere.
Where are these, by the way? Are these all in the same location? How spread out are they?
Similar, yeah. They're all north of Portland by about 20 to 40 minutes north. So they're near Maine's biggest city. They're in sort of higher end suburbs, I would say. Nothing too fancy, no gated communities, but, good school district.
Wow. Well, thank goodness you had that anchor tenant, that law firm covering your overheads. Otherwise, you'd have been the first 3-4 months would have been quite painful.
So what we did is after 3 months, I was like, something's got to change. And I have a lot of small office tenants right now, and they're not doing that bad. In fact, there's some new ones coming in. Like that market is still vibrant. So what I did is said to the co-broker who was listing this with me as a rental, I said, look, I'm just going to take this on myself. This isn't working to do it. It's one big single thing. I need the flexibility to do it quickly and put it on Craigslist, basically. And that's what I did. And I started renting it out to different professionals, and we've now got it completely leased up.
Brilliant.
So we broke it into different, offices and units, and we're going to build more offices because they're kind of open floor space areas, where 10, 20 secretaries used to work. And that's just not a thing anymore. The open concept, everyone breathes the same air office is not safe right now. It's just not. So, but it's also not as profitable, even if it was safe. That's the key point. So we're breaking them up into individual private offices. You can rent them for $500 a month, $750 a month, all day long, and that's worked out really well for us.
So these are just kind of small business owners or like sole traders, basically, and you're converting a big room into a bunch of little offices, or maybe an office for like literally one person or two people, and you're, like you're saying, $500 a month instead of $7,000 a month.
Exactly. Yeah. And it brings diversity to the building. So instead of relying on one or two anchor tenants, if they go bankrupt, I mean, you're in deep trouble. If they get bought out and move or whatever, you're in deep trouble when you rely on single anchor tenants. Whereas when you have a diversity of tenants, that is not a big deal. Just like if you have a portfolio of homes, if you only have one, it's either 100% vacant or occupied. But when you have 20, one of those doing a turnover, it's only a 5% vacancy in your portfolio. So this is the same way. Where we're chopping them
so
up.
do you have to offer a lot more flexibility on the leases for these small renters? Because, big tenants, you get them in for 5, 10, 15 years, but it's not going to be the case with that stuff, I guess.
Exactly. Most of them are 1-year leases. But frankly, Colin, I actually think that is a real advantage right now because the Federal Reserve has promised to inflate the currency and print as much money as they deem necessary to, bail us out of our woes. And I think inflation is going to happen again. Not this year, not probably in 2021, but we could be at 5 or 10% inflation by the middle of this decade without any problem. And for people that lock themselves into a lease for 10 years that has like a 2% or 3% escalation, it's not tied to the CPI or an inflation index, you could get into really sad situations. And I've seen that play out. I've looked at buildings where like they did a 20-year lease with Subway that had a 2% escalation back in the year 2000. Well, guess what? They're like paying like half of market right now because inflation, it's a very powerful force over time.
That's I never thought about it like that. And what about the debt that you've got on those properties? How long is it fixed for?
Yeah, we typically fix for about 5 years, which is about the average amount of time of when you'd want to do a refinance. Earlier on in my career, when I was a little, I don't know if naive is the right word, I just thought the longer the better. So I was fixing for 10-year fixes, and I think when you can do 30-year fixes on single families, that's a no-brainer because the amortization on 30 years, total no-brainer. But for commercial loans, you're probably going to want to refi before that 10-year period. And if you have prepayment penalties on that loan, that kind of sucks to just give the bank 10 or 20 grand just because they have a nice smile, So we did this with a credit union, and this is actually key for your listeners. Credit unions are not allowed to charge prepayment penalties legally.
Oh,
Part of their national charter. So, verify that with your local credit union, but at least that's what I understand. And that's certainly the loan we have. So there's no prepayment penalty. It's a 5-year fix at, I think, 3.8% or 4%. But once we, build out these remaining open spaces and we fill up this building, it's worth double what we paid for it. And we can do a refinance that cashes out all the investors, makes them whole, and then it's pretty much pure profit for the next 5 or 10 years.
And by cashing them out, are you literally paying them off and then retaining all that equity back yourself or most of it back?
Yeah, you kind of wish I had done that sometimes, but no, they're on for the ride. And
okay.
My vision is really to build a long-term, group and following of people that I share the profits with. So I'm not kicking anyone out. I'm not taking it all for myself. I'm not doing anything kind of under the table. I really want them to stay in with me so that they tell their uncles and aunts and friends and family, hey, Dave's getting me a 10% cash on cash return every year. And I just got all my original capital back, in a big windfall. And it was tax-free because of the cost segregation study, that will allow me to do even bigger and cooler projects in the future.
That's brilliant. And maybe it's worth explaining to our listeners how the value of your building might double during a 4 or 5 year period, because if you own a single family home, you're basically waiting for all just the average values, the tide to rise, which takes a long time to double, but it's a little different for commercial, right?
Totally. This blew my mind when I learned the difference between comp-based appraisal and income method appraisal. So comps, all the listeners know what comps are. If you're buying 1,000 square foot house for 150 grand, you're going to look at all the comps of houses in the 900 to 1,100 square foot range and find out all the values and, see what they're selling for right now. That's a comp. Those are comps. And that's how residential property is valued. Commercial property, and this includes multifamily property, and the bigger you get, the more true this is, they don't care about comps. It doesn't matter what the same size building sells for at all. What matters is the profit that building generates, the NOI, the net operating income that building generates. And they use a cap rate, a capitalization rate for the current market. We can get into a discussion of what that all means, but for now, let's just say that's the, rate of return that investors expect in that market. And they use those two numbers, your NOI and your cap rate, to determine your price. So if I can double my profits, I'm doubling my price. If you can reduce your expenses, every dollar that you reduce your expenses in a commercial building, you're adding probably $20 to $30 of value to that building in the price, in the appraisal. So it's a very powerful way that you can accelerate the value growth in a building if it is poorly managed. So like a single family, poor management in a single family means you're not charging the right rent, or maybe you're paying all the utilities when maybe the tenant should be. That's poor management. Same kind of thing applies in commercial, but the consequences are much bigger. If you're only collecting $4,000 for a building that ought to be renting for $9,000, that's a big deal. And if you can reduce the expenses by another $1,000 or $2,000, you're just radically changing the value of that building.
So how do you find those deals? How do you decide presumably if you buy a building that's renting for $5,000, and like you say, if you can get the net operating income to $10,000, the value is double. But generally speaking, you're going to have to do something to that building. You're going to have to get a higher caliber tenant. You're going to have to make updates to the building. How do you decide that strategy and implement it?
Yeah, it came from residential, where I was a value add investor. So I would find, small apartment buildings that had bad siding and needed some fixing up. But it was mostly cosmetic, and I would do that, and it drives the value of the building. And the same is true in commercial, but part of the beauty of commercial is that you really can create most of the value through the people part of the changes. So the office building we bought is a great example. It doesn't need anything. It's fine. It's the best building I've ever bought. It was built in 1986, which for Maine is like yesterday. Most of our house stock comes from the Revolutionary War. So that building, it was in great condition, But the leases were the issue. You know, it's all about the human element that you can reconfigure by studying what being a good landlord means for office, you know, what it means for restaurant or retail. And it's not something that most investors are willing to do. They don't think about, oh, I should learn about restaurant leases, or I should think about these sort of things. But in your own hometown, wherever you are listening to this, there's probably commercial properties that are just sitting on the market, and you could probably make them worth double what they're currently selling for if you had the right tenants. So a lot of times a good strategy is say, all right, I want to pay $5,000 for an option to buy this building over the next 6 months. And during those 6 months, you go and find the tenant. You signed a binding letter of intent with them. You know, then you exercise your $5,000 option because you've now eliminated your risk. You've got an anchor tenant, you know, who's ready to go. You buy the building, you put in the anchor tenant, and you maybe add some more tenants on top of that. And then you can both kind of double the value, or, you know, increase it by whatever amount you are, and do it in a relatively low risk way where you're not buying a vacant building, you know, which I would not really counsel any beginning investors to do. You want tenants that are paying rent and cash flowing in that building.
Yeah. And so how do you find the deals? Where do you, I mean, you're working for a commercial brokerage now, so I guess you got your finger on the pulse a bit, but generally speaking, how do you land on your desk?
Yeah, there are two major sources that I use, and they're both very obvious. You know, one is the MLS. I find good deals on it. And I know that a lot of people will tell you, oh, there's nothing good on there. You know, there's nothing good on LoopNet. There's nothing, you know, it's all like the worst picked over stuff. It's like, no, it's true that lots of properties have been listed for a long time. That doesn't mean they're a bad deal. It just means that the right person has not found the right plan for that building, or that it's not marketed. What I've learned is the worse the listing looks, you know, crappy, blurry photos, little text or whatever, the better that listing probably is as an investment, because the broker doesn't care. You know, the broker is not a high functioning professional. You know, you're not dealing with grade A students. So the other way I find deals is through people. It's through networking. You know, my 7th grade teacher taught me the most valuable advice in life. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And still network, you know, in the age of COVID through Zoom and things like we're doing today. And, you know, if you develop a reputation of like, geez, you know, Sarah has bought like 3 or 4 of these flip homes. She's done these flips. Like, wholesalers will start being like, hey, Sarah, like, I got something for you, you know, and they'll come right to you without you needing to do a direct mail campaign or, you know, those kind of things. So, you know, if you treat people fairly, if you develop a friendly rapport with your providers, like, I've had contractors bring me great deals. Like, hey, buddy, I've seen this house like right next door. The guy was talking about selling. He's talking to me. I mean, like, let contractors be your spies, you know, your eyes and ears in the neighborhood. You know, because they will bring you great information, and you can pay them like a bird dog kind of situation too to find you a great deal. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, networking, keeping an eye on the MLS. I love that about the ones with the worst photos and the crappiest descriptions. And doesn't mean the house is crappy. You know, it just means the listing agent is crappy. You know, generally the house is crappy is not related to the photos and the description.
And the reverse is usually true too. The better the listing, the less likely it is to be a good investment. In commercial, that can be a little different, but if it's a really big building with a really big brokerage, you kind of know what you're getting. And like, yep, it's a 7% return. And all the numbers are pretty much out there, and there's not a lot of magic and art to it. You know, those are harder to kind of juice that up to a 14%, you know, whereas the mom and pop sellers, and they own some surprisingly valuable properties these days. You know, the boomers that started, you know, they might have bought their building 30 or 40 years ago to run their little printing business out of and rent out the other spaces. I mean, they may be sitting on a major nest egg and gold mine, but they've not optimized it. They might be perfectly happy selling it for $1 million when you know from all the market rents and comps and what you can do to it that you can get that sucker up to $2 million within a year or two's time.
That's brilliant. I love that. That's great advice. And so what about property management then? Because any syndicator, anybody controlling a lot of real estate, residential, commercial, generally gets very quick lessons in property management during the first couple of years. I mean, can you share some of the lessons you've learned? I mean, you can choose from residential or commercial and just maybe some general tips for investors.
Absolutely. So good management can make a bad building profitable, and bad management can make a good building unprofitable. And I started out managing myself directly with the tenants, and I was spending, way too much time doing things too manually. But even from the beginning, I used software, and I would recommend that to every listener. Don't let them mail you checks. Anyone who's getting checks in the mail, cut it out. Get software, get direct deposits. Your time is better spent doing other things than waiting for an envelope to come and opening it up and driving it to your bank or doing mobile deposit or any of that.
Yep.
Cozy is a great, free software for landlords. So that's a big piece of it. As I grew, I had a full-time job at Bowdoin College as a fundraiser. So I couldn't be managing 20 and 30 units as I built my portfolio. So I used the management that was in place when I bought the building. Big mistake. Because the building was underperforming. I didn't realize the management was also underperforming.
Well, in hindsight, that seems clear, but at the time, it probably does seem like a good idea.
Like a nice guy, and he was a nice guy, but he wasn't prioritizing it. He was a broker doing broker stuff and doing this on the side. He wasn't screening for background. I had a heroin dealer in there. There's just some real problem tenants. And so I switched from that manager to what I thought was a more professional company, but I came back to similar problems of why is my unit still vacant a month later? When are you going to pay me the rent checks you owe me from last month? All these things just convinced me is they don't care about me the way I would care about me. And I learned from my friend in Minneapolis, they own their own management company. He explained it to me in a really great way. He said, Dave, it's not about the extra profit you earn from management, because frankly, it's a low margin business and you're not going to make a lot of money as a manager. It's about mitigating your risk. It's about controlling your risk. It's about if you have vacancies, by God, you can cut the price today, throw it up on Craigslist and fill that sucker with someone with good credit who's like, wow, that apartment's a good deal. And so that is why I think I went towards my own management. Plus, I just wanted to be confident the tenants were getting treated the way I would treat them. I see them as, they're the ones paying my bills. They're the ones paying my mortgages. They're the ones hopefully making me wealthy over time.
Yeah.
They treated like valued customers, not as like an ATM machine or like a nuisance or a pest, which is how most property management companies treat, calls and inquiries from tenants. It's like, get out of my hair,
Yep.
So I partnered up with my best friend from the MBA program who was looking for a job at the time and just said, hey man, if you do all the work, you can keep all the money from the management. And we'll charge my properties, an increasingly lower fee as we get to scale. And really do a high touch operation. So that's what we've done. And we've now expanded. We're managing for some friends and third parties. We hired one person, we're hiring another now. And, it's just critical to have good people on the property management side. And there are good third party companies. I don't want to trash all of them.
Oh, sure. But you're right. There are certain advantages to having it yourself, especially if you have a top quality person running it and communicating the right kinds of instructions and values and systems.
Right. And what you always have to do, no matter what, whether it's in-house or third party, is manage the manager. You've got to be engaged. You've got to be involved. Nothing is just going to work for you flawlessly, if you ignore it for large amounts of time.
Yeah. You got to check those statements every month, guys. You got to have your own spreadsheets or whatever or QuickBooks or whatever you want to use to track that income, track the expenditure. If something's leaking out, you don't want to look at it once a year or twice a year. You want to see that stuff every month.
Oh, absolutely. And have conversations with them and learn and understand and really get the direct information from them. I think that, it's critical because a lot of times, a manager on the ground might make a decision that has huge cost implications that you would make a different decision. And you want to be, in the game at those points. You want to be in the conversation. You want them to think, to call you before they just go and hire a furnace repair guy to put $5,000 into your furnace. It's like, whoa. Maybe the right thing to do is put $0 into that furnace and to buy 2 heat pumps that cost $3,000 each. And then we're done with the furnace. We're done paying the heating bill for this property or the cooling bill, in your area in Gainesville. Now we can, or Tampa, I'm sorry. I was talking with that guy from Gainesville earlier.
No worries.
I'm sure there's a rivalry there somewhere. But if any time that you're able to get involved in those capital expenditures, get involved in those repairs and say, is this really the best way to spend this money long term, if you're in it for the long term, that is really important to do because there's knee-jerk reactions and there's what the contractor or the manager may think is the right thing to do. You might have a different opinion, and that could be really important. So if you're not tuned in and they just send you a bill. Yep, here's the $5,000 repair bill for your furnace. It's like, it's a 30-year-old furnace. Why are you spending money on it? Like, kill it dead. Like, a new one's $7,000. Like, why would you spend $5,000 on an old one? You know, things like that.
No, I saw that with a multifamily I have in Ohio, and it literally had a 35-year-old furnace. And I was getting these bills saying we sent them out week 1, spent $200. We sent them out week 3, spent another $300. And I'm like, why are you doing this with a furnace that's 35 years old or whatever? Just, smarten up. But they didn't have the same notes I did that said furnace 1983 or whatever. I'm like, just come on, smarten up. But look, anyway, I want to move on from that a little bit because I get the feeling that I've talked to real estate guys all the time. I've had loads of really interesting guests in this show that are super, really successful in real estate and really like it the way you clearly do as well. But I get the feeling because of where you grew up and the time you spent in South America and the stuff you're doing with the kids in poverty in Guatemala, that you have a bigger reason than just doing real estate for the sake of making money. I mean, what is it? I think you clearly use real estate in order to enable you to live a certain type of lifestyle or help certain types of people. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Absolutely, Colin. I resisted getting involved in real estate initially because landlords do not have the most sterling, pristine reputation, in society. We're not known as like the best of the best. And what I realized is, to me, the environment is very important. Climate change is real, it's happening, and I want to have an impact to make this planet better for my kids, your kids, the next generations to come. I was in the Boy Scouts when I was younger. You're taught to always leave your campsite, cleaner and better than you found it. I see that, kind of on a community and global level. So I thought, hey, I can only do so much with my own house. I got my solar panels, check, got my heat pumps checked, but that's not going to change the world. But if I could do that to 100 or 1,000 other houses and use tenant money to do it and be profiting while I do it because I'm doing it, and then I could teach other landlords how to make a profit by making the planet a greener place. Like, that could be really impactful, and so that is really part of what motivates me. Another part is just creating great spaces, for tenants and communities. And like, real estate investing has allowed me to create these feel-good moments that honestly, Colin, are more powerful than what I was doing with kids in Guatemala, because I was, the guy behind the scenes. I was raising money. I was putting on 5K fundraisers. I was rarely in the classroom watching lives transform. Here, like right now, we're placing a family of local people who have just had, difficulty, and they've been living in a hotel with their 2 kids. And initially we were like, whoa, not a good tenant profile. Their credit's like 500, or
right.
No, it was 400. And we were like, dang, I've never even seen a 400 credit score. Like, that's the lowest I've ever seen. And this woman had had a car repossessed. And like, we got into the story. Why was that? Well, it was because the car broke down. It was a used car. It needed a big repair, and the repair was more money than the car was worth. And so she had a choice. Like, I can pay this repair and be underwater on my car, or I can walk and let them reclaim it. She did that. But all of her references were great. Her employer, her former landlords, former employers, former, folks, they're all like, great lady. The guy is a helper of one of our contractors. He's been working great with them, and I trust this contractor, worked with him for 3 years. He wouldn't hire, a delinquent. So this family is getting out of paying, through the nose for a hotel. They're homeless essentially right now.
Wow.
Long-term rental, because I have a long-term rental, and I've done that. I've taken 5 families from homeless shelters and put them in our rentals, and they've all paid. They're good people, because we have relationships with the social workers and the people that run the homeless shelters, and they don't want to give us a lemon that's addicted to heroin. Like, that is not the right fit for us. Like, they need the halfway house or whatever, support they need.
Yep.
For people who are hardworking, they can get jobs. They just need a chance and a hand up. We are able to take that risk. I'm not saying y'all should just let anyone with any credit score in. Like, I would never take someone with an eviction. I've done that before. I've been burned every time. Don't do it. There's lines that I won't cross. Any like violent offenders, one guy was like, oh yeah, my record's totally clean. I mean, there was this little domestic abuse thing, but it was all her fault, and we got it all figured out. But, might show up on the record. I'm like, have a nice life, buddy. Like, click, like, not happening here. So I think you have to have rules. You have to be fair, but that doesn't mean that you have to turn away good, honest, hardworking people who just need a chance.
I love that. I love that. And look, you've got the scale now where it's not like you're getting a 10 unit and you're putting all 10 people from the homeless shelter in the 10 unit. You're doing it here and there, and you're helping out families dramatically. But if you ever make a bad decision, it's not going to ruin your cash flow either. You're balancing it.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to balance that risk reward. You can't, and I can't subsidize anyone. I mean, there's not. Well, I shouldn't say anyone. There are a few like senior citizens that we have where I bought the property. They're on a fixed income. They don't want to move, and I just don't have the heart to like jack the rent up to market. So yeah, I'm going to earn 10 or 20% less on that rent, maybe 30% less, but it's only here and there. There's two or three of those that we have in the portfolio of 100 units. And I figure maybe the good karma, that we get from letting them kind of cruise in their retirement is going to affect us in other ways. And I found that to be kind of true of like, if you treat them well, they won't demand big repairs, or, they'll be easy tenants to work with in other ways, perhaps, or they might watch the building really carefully. Like, that's another great piece of advice for listeners. Like, find tenants who've lived there for a long time, who have that kind of pride of ownership. And, again, make them your spies, make them your helpers. Like, I've even given them a discount for like mowing the lawns, doing some of the relief raking. Like, that'll be way less money for you than paying a professional, to come and do it. And they're happy to do it because for them, it's their property. And, you'll get the call of like, hey, so-and-so, there's a police car out front of so-and-so's unit and they're breaking windows or whatever. Like, you want those tenants to be your, eyes and ears on the ground.
Yeah, it is. And it's amazing how loyal some landlords are to tenants. I remember one of my multifamilies, there was this old lady living there and she was paying well under market rent, but the seller made an agreement with me, was like, look, I'm going to subsidize this lady's rent for as long as she wants to live there. I think the rents were like $700 a month. The lady was paying $400. So I'm literally getting an extra, I think 200 or 250 from this seller that I bought it from years ago. She's still paying this lovely old lady's rent every month. I mean, how nice is that? How sweet is that?
Oh yeah, I find that a lot. And I bought a 6-unit building in a very low income area just for a cash flow property, no big chance of appreciation. And it had tenants who'd been there like 30 and 40 years in the same units. There was one tenant who's in his 50s and he was born in his unit.
Wow.
That his rented. I mean, that's the
wow.
degree, that it came to. And, one of the guys there who was kind of the handyman, the caretaker, he was the eyes and ears. He got a terminal cancer diagnosis like 6 months after I bought the property, 3 months to live kind of thing. And I told him right then, I was like, I'm not going to raise the rent, on your wife. She can stay, as long as she wants. And for him, like, I think that gave him a huge amount of peace, as he was going forward. And you can't put a dollar number on that. And like, she'll either move or pass on or whatever it may be later. And we'll put it up to market and, we can do that.
Sure.
But, I got to sleep at night.
You do.
I think it's something where doing the right thing in your heart will bring back other unforeseen blessings in other areas tenfold, and you got to sleep at night in this business.
It does. No, and especially if you should do that from day one, but especially if you get any kind of scale in terms of the numbers of units you own and rent, you have a lot more freedom to make those signs. And, I want to kind of finish up soon because I'm taking up a lot of your time, but have you any parting advice for our listeners, Dave, on how they can leverage real estate to build better lifestyle and perhaps, help the planet, help people less fortunate from themselves? What's a good starting point for them?
Buy a house, buy an investment property, get started. Because I think most listeners are probably still in that analysis paralysis phase, or they've done one, but they don't want to do two. It is time, and no matter what, if you're a buy and hold investor, for multifamily or for single family, you'll look back in 10 or 20 years and you won't regret it. You might regret it in 1 year or two, but I think the key is getting started. It's educating yourself, invest in yourself, learn. Don't pay some guru as much money as a down payment. Just like pay the down payment, but
yes.
Book, podcast, listen to Colin's show. Don't miss an episode because this is free advice that can change your life and get you started in a way that will resonate. And certain episodes, for this show and others, like they just turn your light bulbs on. They're like, oh my gosh, that guest has exactly the plan that I want to replicate, here in Tampa or here, wherever you are. So I would say focus on education, don't do a single car ride without listening to a podcast. Like I cannot take a car ride without a podcast. When I'm cleaning the dishes, I'm sweeping floors, I'm mowing the lawn, it's all podcasts all the time. Because that's how you will crush it in real estate. You will get tips and tricks and tax strategies and all kinds of information that nobody is born knowing, and they don't teach it in school.
That's brilliant. Brilliant advice, Dave. I love it. Look, I've really enjoyed this conversation. How can people reach out to you after the show if they want to learn a little bit more about you or reach out to you?
Yeah, if you want to invest with me or you want to learn more, happy to chat on the phone, and you can just give me a call, 207-517-5700. My website is holmanhomes.com, and my email is dave@holmanhomes.com. And Colin can probably throw those in the show notes, but
sure.
Google me, and I'm out there and would love to get in touch.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Dave. Let's stay in touch, and really appreciate your time.
Likewise, Colin. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
There you go, folks. That was Dave Holman on Colin Podcasting About Real Estate Show 24. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I certainly did. I think you could tell just how enthusiastic and passionate Dave is, not just about real estate, but also about what he does beyond real estate, helping others less fortunate, using real estate to leave the world a better place. I really enjoyed that philosophy. I really appreciated his time to talk about that very unique experience he had, starting up with forming all those camping stores in Bolivia and helping the poor kids in Guatemala, and his initial forays into building a portfolio with no money down, using his wealthier friends and family's money as deposit, signing down as a co-guarantor on the loan, and just building it step by step while doing all the work. That is a fantastic way of getting your asset column in the black and getting it growing, just doing a lot of the work for finding deals, getting the dealing with the property manager, getting the tenant in there, dealing with the monthly statements, keeping an eye on everything, just slowly building up a good reputation for yourself, and other people would be happy to invest with you that way. It's a great and a tried and trusted way of getting into real estate. And I think he illustrated quite well just how powerful real estate syndications can be and how powerful commercial property can be in general. If you own a portfolio of 10 or 15 houses, that's fantastic. You can get a 3.84% interest rate on them and hold them on for long enough. Built up a fantastic nest egg, a lot of equity. But if you're more hands-on than that and you want to buy a 10, 20, 30 unit or something with a mixed use with a couple of retail and offices on the bottom and some apartments above, like Dave said, if you're just better at managing and growing the net operating income, you can have a dramatic impact on the value of that asset. And then if you're able to refi after 3, 4, 5 years, you can get all your initial capital and sometimes a profit out and refi it and still be cash flowing very well. So that's something, I've, been meaning to get more involved in, meaning to invest in. I've invested passively in syndications before, but I want to get more active at it. And, Dave's enthusiasm is kind of pushing me in the direction to do that. And, who knows, maybe in this post-COVID environment, there could be some tremendous opportunities out there for commercial and mixed use as well. But, my expertise is in residential, in single families. I'm still very active there. I've bought more properties in the foreclosure auctions in the last couple of weeks. So I'm having fun renovating those at the minute. And I'm very happy to talk to people about foreclosure auctions. I've taught people about it as well. I've done a couple of courses on it. And it's a fantastic way of learning the ropes. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the foreclosure space. I do see foreclosure volumes increasing in pretty much every county across the country, probably starting next year. I'm not really seeing it yet. Going into November and December will probably be quiet as well. But next year and onwards, we're going to see some increased volumes. I do see the demand meeting those volumes, so I don't see any imminent crashes in real estate prices or anything like that, but I do see a lot more deals coming our way if you're able to grab them in foreclosure auctions. But regardless, I appreciate your attention to all of these shows. I really appreciated Dave Holman as a guest. I think you should check him out if you want to learn more about him, what he does, his syndications. Look at the show notes, but holmanhomes.com or dave@holmanhomes.com will get you where you need to go, and you can take it from there. But, aside from that, I'm going to sign out now. I will be back very soon for show 25. Thanks again for everything. This is Colin G. Murphy signing out. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.